A lot of you probably are quite familiar with the Foundation of Young Australia's report that the average person is more likely to have up to about 17 jobs in 5 different industries over the span of their career. Our next guest, Matt, is probably well on his way for his 17 different careers. He's gone from a law degree to working in radio, then a startup, and now Australia's largest technology company, Telstra. So please welcome the Innovation Community Manager of the Telstra Hub, Matt.
Thanks, Michaela. I got told that this spot straight after lunch is the hardest because everyone's all carb-loaded and lethargic. So I'll do my best. But yes, it's great to be here to talk about my career because it's taken quite a strange shape, and I've ended up at Telstra Labs, which is where the emerging technology and innovation team for Telstra sit. But that's definitely not where I started. I actually started here in Perth, University of Western Australia. I studied law. Thankfully, I never had to use it. My first job was straight out of uni was in radio, which for someone who has a law degree is a strange choice. I interviewed rock stars and pop stars, and that was me and my old show, and everyone know who that is? Yeah, good. Just checking. From there, I joined a startup called Omni Studio, and then what they were doing is they were helping radio stations get their radio online. And what happened when I started working there about a year in, there was a podcast called Serial that launched. I don't know if anyone heard it, but it was like a murder mystery podcast. And all of a sudden, every single radio station now wanted podcasts yesterday. So as a little Melbourne startup, we found ourselves all of a sudden traveling around the world and helping a whole bunch of different companies, some media companies, some not media companies, new things like podcast networks that didn't exist a few years ago. And so that was really fun, but it was very different to working in radio. And then that's not just what I do now, but also I do a comedy show called The Big Hoo-Ha. It's on in Melbourne on Friday nights. That's the cast of that show. I do a podcast called Something Amazing. Cheap little plug there. I help produce a web series that films on the street pianos all around Melbourne. And what's weird about all of this is how did all these different skill sets lead to me eventually working in the innovation team at Telstra Labs. And I think that's what I want to talk to you about, is about what the shape of my career being so weird and what it means to work in an innovation team, what it means to work in a startup, and maybe what some of the skills you might need to do it. So I'll take a step back and go, okay, well, what is Telstra Labs? What is where we are now? It's basically got 3 objectives. First objective is acceleration. Basically, that means there's a lot of different growth areas that Telstra could explore. If they're big and interesting enough, they tend to come in our door first to assess whether they are something that Telstra should do or not. And we've got a whole process around that I'll talk about. Ecosystem, that's the second objective. That's where I play. That's why I'm the Innovation Community Manager. It's a healthy appreciation that you can't be innovative in a vacuum. You can't just keep in the same 4 walls and keep doing what you've always done and expect things to get better. You have to look outside sometimes. So a healthy ecosystem that we connect with, whether that's unis, startups, Silicon Valley, London, whatever the other global hubs are, what our customers are, even Telstra internally, there might be some good ideas there as well. So we've got to keep that ecosystem really active, and that includes universities as well. And the last one is culture. So what we don't want is people to outsource innovation to us, to our Telstra Labs. Innovation should be everywhere in the business. So what we try and do is we try and be a best-in-class example of an innovation team and how to be innovative, so that we can kind of be the gold standard and help the rest of the business have that culture. So what are the kind of people who work in an innovation team? So our team is very varied. I mean, you've got me, who has a background in radio and comedy and startups, but there's also designers who make everything look nice. There's software developers who can prototype software solutions really fast. There's coaches, so facilitators who help step people through our innovation process, which I'll talk about in a second. And then there's the technology, which is some of the smartest people I've ever met, looking at these emerging tech areas like AR, VR, Internet of Things, drones, blockchain, all the buzzwords. They're experimenting with them and saying what's possible. Can it do this? Is it good in this situation? Is it bad in this situation? And so on and so forth. What I love about our team, though, is the diversity of it. And I think it shows some really good hiring. And I don't just mean diversity in terms of gender, but also, and I realise the irony talking as a straight white male, talking about diversity in gender, but our team is very diverse, but also geographically and also our backgrounds, what we've all done before. Because if you're an innovation team and you're trying to do something different that's better, how are you going to have different point of views? Just like you need to get outside the same four walls, you also need to get different people contributing to the ideas that are coming through the door. So when we rock up to work each day, what do we actually do? So this is a thing called the double diamond. It's not new, we're not reinventing the wheel or anything, but what it does, it's called the double diamond because it's a series of diverging and converging. So what will normally happen is somebody will come to the innovation team and go, I think this is a problem that we should solve, or that Telstra should solve. It might be a customer going, here's a huge problem I think our industry has. It might be internally in Telstra, but it normally starts with this hunch or this pain point. Some people want to start with the technology. Some people come and go, I've got a robot, I want to use it. Or I've got a drone, I want to fly it. And we go, great, but we're going to go back to the problem. We're going to check that there's a problem to solve before we look at the solution. So when we're checking that problem, we go out and we basically talk to people, whether it's customers, whether it's people inside Telstra, whether it's people on the street, we don't mind. But we're trying to put data around whether the problem that people think is a problem is an actual problem. And what you end up with at the end of that first diamond is a validated problem, a big one worth solving. Then we look at solutions. So they might be technology solutions, they might be human solutions, it might be a whole new business model. It doesn't matter, we'll look at everything. And then we start to prototype and build an example of those solutions. And then we go out again and we show that to people. There's a saying that the best business plan in the world doesn't survive its first impact with a customer. So the way that we work is we try and get our solutions in front of customers before we spend millions building products, which is kind of the old way of doing stuff. So what you end up with at the end of this is a validated problem and a validated solution, and then hopefully it graduates from Telstra Labs elsewhere into the business. So that's a bit of background about what we do. What I like in terms of the skills that makes this work is these four people on the board. So you've got your scientist, your Albert Einstein, the eternally curious, nothing's 100%, you're just dealing in probabilities, experiment, keep an open mind, right? That's the personality trait that works really well. Then you've got Elon Musk. This is a great example because Elon Musk wants us all to go to Mars. But he doesn't start there. That's his big problem that he wants to solve. We need to be an interplanetary species. What he does is he goes to the first problem in that journey and says, well, if we're going to have any chance of getting to Mars, we need to be able to reuse rockets. Otherwise, it's not economically feasible. So he works on that small for him, small problem first. And when he solves that, he's got reusable rockets that work now, then he starts to try and build a big one. And then eventually, the steps along the way will lead to solving his big problem, which is us being stuck on Earth. So that's what think big, let's go to Mars. Start small, let's build reusable rockets, and scale fast, let's try and get there as quick as possible and learn along the way. Marie Curie, the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, she is our obsessed with obsessively curious, but also she follows a scientific process. So she sets up a hypothesis, she tests it, she learns from it, and she goes from there. So that's what her skill set represents for us. And then you've got Sue Ismail, who is like the original hacker, hustler, She is the entrepreneur. She started, if you don't know who she is, she basically started in a family kitchen, working out a hair removal cream, came up with it, and then scaled it into a $42 million business from there. So she really represents for us falling in love with the problem, talking to your customers, and getting out of the building. So that's a little bit on some of the skills that work well on our team. What I want to do now is just really quickly teach you some innovation terms that you might come across but you have no idea what they mean. The first one is design thinking or human-centered design. Can I get a hand up if you've heard of this before? Can I keep that hand up if you know what it means? Okay, good, about half the room. So basically this was pioneered by Google, and it's a way of working that you hopefully arrive at an idea that you can then use as a product in the future. The main point about design thinking and human-centered design is that you talk to people and empathize with their problems and their situation and their use cases. You spend some time with them, then you clearly define the problem, you come up with some ideas to try and solve it, you prototype it, you test it, you get it out. In my opinion, cross-functional teams work best. If you just have a table full of engineers, you're only going to get an overly engineered solution. You need like a marketing person, a designer, all these different people contributing to this process. What you get at the end of it is a solution that is three things. First of all, it's desirable, i.e. do people want it? It's feasible, i.e. it's possible, and it's viable, i.e. it can scale. So those three things working together, desirability, feasibility, viability, is what we look for when we're doing human-centered design. Next one, lean startup. Who's heard of this one? Who knows what it means? Yeah, okay, a little less on this one. So this was credited to Eric Ries, who is an author well worth checking out. But basically, it's about being scientific with the way that you approach your experiments, your hypothesis that you're testing. So you set it, you build something, you measure it, you learn from it, and you go around. So this is where some phrases like iterations come from, should always be iterating. This is where minimum viable product comes from, which is like the cheapest and quickest way to build something that works, that lets you test your idea. You don't want to spend all your time planning and spend millions building on something that's not going to work. So basically you do the minimum viable product and then get that out there and test it. And then the pivot as well, which is when you're learning that something isn't working or that the problem that you thought was a problem is actually a bigger problem over here, and you move towards that. That's where all these phrases come from, is that lean startup methodology. Hackathon. Who's heard this one? Right? It's probably the most overused word in the innovation world at the moment. What a hackathon is unis love it, corporates love it. You stick a bunch of people in a room, you give them a time limit, and you say best solution wins to a problem. Hackathons can be great. We ran one recently, the Innovation Challenge, which was all around healthcare and using technology to solve health problems. Some of the solutions the uni students and the public stream came up with, like it was all physio exercises with like little lights that says when you're doing the exercise right, posture correctors, all kinds of things. When a hackathon is done right, they're great because they do come up with solutions quickly. However, some people use hackathons as theatre, innovation theatre, where you're getting people in a room, overworking them for 24 hours and going, see, wasn't that fun? If there's no place for the ideas to go, if there's nowhere for those ideas to be developed and actually be put forward as a solution or taken forward, then you are literally wasting everyone's time. So one thing we look for hackathons is to make sure that there's a good place for these ideas to go after that they're done. So back to what I do quickly. So I engage the ecosystem. That's what I try and do, is that I make sure that what we do at Telstra Labs is well connected to the outside world, including universities and startups and our customers and everything you can see in that kind of outer ring. That's what we care about. the reason I had this job is because I worked at a startup beforehand. So to end, I just wanted to run through what I think the big differences are between working in a startup and working in a corporate. This may come up because students might want to work in startups and they might have a great idea, and we should always encourage that. But from your point of view, here's the differences that I've noticed. So first of all, startups are fast, right? When you work in a startup, you can tack between 5 or 6 different ideas in a year and still generally be going the same speed in the same direction. Corporates, on the other hand, because of the scale in which they operate, they don't go, can you imagine if a big corporate changed its plan, its big plan that it puts out to the market 5 times in a year? They would get crucified, right? So they need strategy documents, they need planning documents because the scale in which they operate is so big. When you're in a startup, you learn business fast. When I was in a startup, I was doing sales, customer support, HR, finances, social media, copywriting, talking at conferences, and that was all Monday. So something that was like 1/5 of your day in a startup would be a whole floor at Telstra. So you learn really, really fast in a startup about how businesses work and how they really work. But in a corporate, you're a little more focused. You have your thing that you have to be good at. Startups are risky, and by risky, what I mean here is that when you do a startup, you don't know if people are going to want what you're selling. You don't know if people are going to want what you're putting out. So it feels like a really big, scary risk. It's exhilarating, but it's scary. Whereas corporates, they tend to know what they're doing because they've been doing it for a while. They know what they're good at and they know what they're known for. So it's very easy to decide what you should be doing and what isn't. The relationship between corporates and startups are interesting because startups need corporates for one reason mainly, is because they have money, and startups need money. And likewise, corporates want to understand startups a little better. They want to go, oh, surely, look at these startups, how quick they can move, how nimble and agile they are. Surely we could learn a lot from them. Surely they could explore markets quicker than we can. So you've got to try and avoid the petting zoo phenomenon, but some corporates are really good at working with startups. What I liked about Telstra coming from a startup was the fact that it had like clear programs of work that meaningfully engage startups like Muradi, which is the accelerator inside Telstra. So it's a big difference though, because if you work on the startup side, corporates are both the big baddies and also the thing you need to keep paying the bills. Whereas likewise, if you're on the corporate side, everyone's like, oh, wouldn't it be great to work at a startup? But also they can't be as agile as that. So when you're in a startup, I used to love the fact that I could come up with an idea and go to the founders, hey, wouldn't this be good? And I'd go to sleep and wake up in the next day and they'll show me that idea that I had working. And it would look like shit, but it worked. And so I love that being influential, and that's how you feel working in a startup, that your decisions matter. Whereas in a corporate, you are of course one of many. To be a cog in a machine, and sometimes that's a good thing because there's many people influencing a decision, but you individually are a little less important to the decision than you would be in a startup. In a startup, you can't switch off. I think that people don't talk enough about how mentally difficult it is working in a startup, like how tough it is on your mental health, because I was getting up at 3 a.m. to do calls because that's the only time I could get that radio station in America to talk to me. I slept at work once because I had to do a webinar to 1,000 people at 5 a.m. in the morning, which was prime US time. You don't switch off, you don't have holidays, it's impossible. Whereas holidays are real in a corporate. You can put on your autoresponder and people vaguely respect it, which is good, which it feels like a holiday in itself when you go from one to the other. Startup's very emotional. You feel like if you don't make that sale, if you don't achieve that thing, the 5 people in the room who have given up everything. Some have given up their jobs, some have given up security, some have even given up their own money to have you there. If you stuff it up, maybe you're going to ruin their life and their dream. So it's very emotional. The amount of times I thought it was over in our startup, but it wasn't. But it felt like we were going out of business a couple of times. And every startup owner will tell you they have that same story. Whereas corporates are big. It's like the whole decision of what you're working on is made by someone else. So it's not just up to you, it's up to your team. Finally, startups are fun. Like, I'm not going to beat around the bush. You know, you want the beer kegs in the kitchen and the, you know, free lunches and the whiskey bars or whatever they had. One of the startups in Sydney literally had an ice skating rink brought into their startup as some corporate fun. So they are really great to work in. But corporates are funded, so you feel a bit like the bricks and mortar isn't going to go away if everything goes differently. So what I will say is you definitely suffer from the grass is always greener, and that definitely applies to this list as well. But what I could say is after 2.5 years in a startup, I was tired. I was just drained, and I needed to get off the roller coaster for a bit. And now I get to work across these kind of emerging technologies and solve big problems for big companies, and that feels pretty great. So if anyone comes up to you and says they want to work for one or the other, just maybe this advice would help, just that this is how they're different. But what we have found is that universities are starting to fill this very important role, which is they are all creating these accelerators or incubators inside the tertiary institutions that are designed for those first-time founders and those businesses that maybe won't work. And maybe they'll get some expertise and some experience, and it might fail. Most startups do, and that's fine because they're in this safe environment. And then what we're finding is then the later stage companies, the ideas that are sticking, that are starting to get some traction, that's where corporates like Telstra start working with them. And we should support that. But it's just a very different way of working, and I hope that's given you some insight into the differences between the two. Thanks so much.